Okay, it's 3 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, uh, I'm sure people will trickle in as we go along. My name is Brandon Murray. I'm a librarian and archivist here in the Dallas History and Archives Division of Dallas Public Library, which is what the seventh floor is. We've got an archives collection that deals with Texas history and also Dallas history, and a lot of unique archival materials as well. And so a lot of really cool exhibit materials we have on display currently that you can take a gander at once this program is over. And so I'd like to welcome you to this event, which is a panel discussion of the history of Duke Ellum. And I'd like to introduce our presenters. Professor Clarence Glover, also known as Professor Freedom, will start first, and then when he is finished, Donald Glover, the unofficial historian of Black Dallas, will pick up where he left off. So I will turn it over to them, and hope that you enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and we welcome you to the first federal national holiday of Juneteenth. And I come today representing as a Union soldier of the Union troops that were established there by President Lincoln and who began to fight in the Union Army and made a significant difference in the outcome of the war. So we give honor and respect to them because this is one of the elements that we're respecting today. I work with the National Juneteenth Foundation, and one of our themes has been to begin to look at the African American soldiers and the Union soldiers, so I come in there. Plus, I am a part of a Buffalo Soldier Regiment here in the Lancaster community where we actually do reenactments and other things, so I reenact both the Union soldiers who became the Buffalo Soldiers. So we welcome you on their behalf. I'm going to speak very fast because our time is short, and I certainly want to have some interaction with you and certainly give my good friend Don Payton his time to do it. I'm from Louisiana, so I can speak real fast, but I'm in Texas, so I'll slow down a little bit as I can for you, for you to be able to understand, hopefully. My part of my section today is to look at Texas from a different perspective. You also can Google, and I'm certainly excited for Googling. When I was at SMU teaching, we had to have all this paperwork, so I just tell you about the Google now, you know? But you can Google the Dallas Examiner, this week's edition that I published an article entitled King Cotton. My subject is Juneteenth, the Cotton Picking Truth. So please Google it, read it at your leisure. The principal part of my article there in the Dallas Examiner, which is an African American newspaper here in our community, was to begin with the phrase that Stephen F. Austin used after he and his father, Moses Austin, began to come to Texas. And what Stephen Austin said in essence was that we can rise out of poverty. We can rise out of poverty by going to what was then northern Mexico, but which became Texas, and we can rise out of poverty by raising cotton, but we cannot do it without the slave. As an African-American professor of history, I like to always ask we cannot do without the Africans, the enslaved Africans. I think that's a very important point to make today, particularly as we as a nation are beginning to try to look at identity and culture. So often we use, so many times I've used the word slave. Slavery is a condition and not a people. But it is often associated with people of African descent. So I choose to use the fact that's word African, as we did at DISD years ago. That's where we said that, no, we're not simply black people. We are African American people because black is not a political geographical identity. There's Europe, there's Asia, there's blah, but there's an Africa where a people come from. So we cannot understand who we are until we see ourselves as a people. Black is not a people, it is a color. And yet blackness has affected us because we are black. But we look at the African people who were enslaved. So Stephen F. Austin knew something about the Deep South. When we call it Deep South, we're talking about areas of Kentucky, Georgia, Alabama, and so forth, Deep South. By this time, the South had been impacted by the Union and other places and a war. And so when we start talking about Texas, this New Spain area over here, what we have is this new area that Moses Austin began to look at. But Stephen Austin, his father passed, so he now begins to take on the leadership of this movement. Then we have what we call impresarios. Impresarios become these land grant individual amen who would go and come to this area. And it's very important to understand this in terms of the beginning of this state, and we don't like to talk about it, but it is a part of our early history, because Texas was in essence, and Andrew Torget in my article in the book that he writes about seeds of empire and so forth, that this was the beginning of the nation, an empire built on African enslavement and cotton. And so these impresarios, these men, your Anglo men, were to come here. And a man with a family could get 640 acres, and a man with no family could get 320 acres, free land, Anglo men. I submit this was one of the early affirmative action movements, where you get something and you begin, you didn't have to pay for it basically, but for some reason it was given by, i.e. some type of government at that time, you see. And so the men are coming here. I'm just gonna make some notes because I say I'm gonna talk fast, but because my research has led me so many directions, because I was doing a piece of research just the other day over on 2nd Avenue looking at the cotton gin, Brother Don, in front of the school. Came to find out, my mind is moving, the gentleman who ran that cotton gin, that was a cotton gin because the fairground was a plantation. It was a cotton plantation, i.e. cotton boll. But in looking at that particular building, finding out that he was buried over in a space called the W.W. Glover Cemetery, which is on Military Parkway. I went to the cemetery and have now become a part of that family because George Glover came here from Alabama. My family is from Alabama. The premise is that most African, all African, remember at that time, took their names from the owners. So within the close proximity that my family was to the Glovers and Hills in Alabama, and Ribbon Hill and the Rogers and the Polances, et cetera. So I'm putting these pieces together. This is in the 1840s now, very quickly, in the 1840s. And so they come here, and W.W. Glover is the first person born in Dallas County. First, born in Dallas County, W.W. Glover. He is buried in the W.W. Glover Cemetery. So when I went there and with the families, I began connected with the great-great-great-great-grandson of W.W. Glover. He and I have become very good friends now. And we've been piecing this together because what I am also working toward is the premise that Africans who came here to Dallas County with people like Don Payne's family and others are actually pioneers. These are just pioneers just like anyone else. Although they were property, but they were workers, they were builders, they were pioneers, giving them historical dignity that they have not had before. So as I put my family, which I did not plan to find, because we have the Glover Park over there now, which I've been to, and so I've been with the Dallas Pioneer Association. I've now become connected to them. I'm giving lectures, et cetera, et cetera. So here we are in the 1840s, Glover Pass, which is right off of Zaine Road there. So there we are in the 1840s. Why am I talking about this? Because these are individuals who come under what is now called the Peters Colony. The Peters Colony is a very important piece of history to understand. William Peters was one of the impresarios who was able to come here and always, it's in my article again, Cotton Picking, Juneteenth, the Cotton Picking Truth here in Texas. Dallas County, Tarrant County, et cetera, all up in McKinney. This was Peters Colony, where I live next to Highland Park, Elm Thicket North Park, which we're going through gentrification right now. All was Peters Colony. The Love Field Airport was a plantation. Cochran brought cotton to North Dallas. The Carews, of course, had SMU, which was a plantation, and from that 2,000 acres of land with Mr. Bonner, Anderson Bonner, was able to acquire, which became the Over 5, Big 5, the LBJ, Medical City, all of which was later taken away. Now, why is my conversation unique? Because one of the things that I have done is to bring to Dallas cotton, because I grew up on a cotton plantation, okay? I literally grew up on a plantation. My family are plantation people, and my great-grandfather had his own plantation. So when I do my research and I talk about this is a sack, you have to understand this is the basic operational instrument of the African enslaved. To pull up to 200 pounds or more, making sometimes 1,000 pounds, depending on how many times they can fill it up. And so when you are able to see it, you have a better understanding. I did not bring the shackles in because my time is, plus I'm everywhere. But in this bag, and you can get some at the end of my session, is actually raw, pure cotton that I pick every year throughout the state of Louisiana and throughout Texas, because there are many thousands of acres. Now, what does it have to do with our walk talk today? Well, first you have a gentleman by the name of Munger, Robert Munger. The cotton gin was patent. We say patent because some suggest that it was actually invented by an African man named Sam. You can look that up as well, Google it. But During the early days, we would have to take cotton and separate it with our fingers, African people. That was laborious. After the gin was made, the gin is not new to America. We have them in India and other parts of the world. I have an Indian gin at home, but it's a small one. But what happened, the one that we was patenting here had teeth in it, and the teeth grabbed the fiber and pulled it out. Also, before coming to America, cotton was very important because my family on my father's side is from Ghana. And so when I was in Ghana in 2004, I was able to sit and understand the stories that we have in our culture, mythologies like Greek and Roman mythology, and we have the story of Anansi the spider. Some of you may have heard of Anansi the spider. Anansi the spider taught the people how to spin their cotton into what? Thread, yes. Just like the little children are sitting out there, and the little children watch the master spin their cotton into what? Thread. And from this thread, then they will make what is called kente cloth or mud cloth, you see? And so I could do that very carefully. And then I make bracelets today. So what happens is that now you have this crop which takes over tobacco and sugarcane, et cetera, that now jumps up. Slavery is abolished, and we think that life is going to change. But as the crop becomes the most economically based crop in America, something happens. This cotton gin is invented, but more so than that, here in Dallas area, in what is called over in my hair, Robert Munger invents now the cotton gin making machine. Huh. The cotton gin making machine, and then later on connects with the Continental Cotton Gin Company, and guess where they are? On Elm Street. Oh, so now we have this manufacturing company, basically what? Leading the world, producing cotton, making machines, sending it out through areas of cotton, areas of the area. At that time, 1/6 of the world's cotton was produced within a 150-mile radius of Dallas, Texas. 1/6 of the world's cotton was produced within a 150-mile radius of Dallas, Texas. Ellis County was the largest cotton county in the world. Ellis County. The railroad tracks that you see coming in and out, particularly going down Deep Ellum, were all about cotton, Katy Trails and others. So now we see this world built up around Deep Ellum. Here at the bottom, this is Deep Ellum right here. This is Elm Street. It was the headquarters of all these cotton bills that you see right here, okay? And the cotton bills are very important. Now, this is in 1840, going into 1879, into the 1880s and so forth. So we're going from the 1840s into the 1870s. And so we began to see that evolution. But also, I'm jumping a little bit because I know we want to really have a talk this afternoon. We have then what? 1926, and the Inland Cotton Exchange is built in Dallas. The second largest building in Dallas, down on San Jacinto. Now, think about that now. We've gone from the 40s? So we see what? Slavery, of course. Up until what? Tomorrow, Juneteenth. So yes, people were actually freed on that day, but that did not change what? The production of cotton, okay? And the abuse of using African people to continue to be the labor force. So Deep Ellum became that place where people would leave the what? Cotton fields. And from that, you have many people, Bly Van Lemon, you have Robert Johnson, you have many people came to Harry Ledbetter from my home in Louisiana where I grew up, and that's in Shreveport, Morningsport where he was raised as well. I was raised in Dixie, and his song, I wish I was a little bitty baby born, my mama used to rock me in the cradle, in them old cotton fields back home, in my home in Louisiana, just about a mile from Texarkana, in them old cotton, well, that's Huddy, okay? So we have this culture coming up, music. Then we see the other immigrants coming into Deep Ellum, right? We see Jews, we see others. A very eclectic group of people on the outskirts of downtown Dallas. And so we have these communities like what I had today. I just left Joppy. Then you have other places short in North Dallas. And where African people move for safety, yes, for purposes of safety. Much of North Dallas was rural country at that time, okay? So we began to see all these places, but Deep Ellum became known for the arts, the blues. The blues is just a manifestation of the music that grows out of our experience. Much of it was code language, you see? Coded, covered language about what we couldn't say really in actual words. So we have these two different experiences. Oh, and here you see that. Then I have here the image of, in 1907, we have the cotton, Dallas is the cotton market in 1907, but in 1922, the largest market in America by 1922. Here with 1,500,000 bales of cotton. You have to understand that a 500-pound bale of cotton here makes $313,600 $100 bill. Every 500-pound bale of cotton makes $313,600 went down on, along with shirts, shoes, sheets, etc. So this is a very important copy. Then here I have an image of a young lady with a football in hand with two bowls of cotton standing on a cotton bale in front of the cotton bowl. At the time, the Cotton Bowl was a parade, it was celebrated. What I'd like to leave you with this afternoon is as you think about Deep Ellum, think about it as a place where African people had to come to you engage in a commerce of singing, the music, and those buying and selling, many who came from the fields and the places into that area. But they were never able to benefit from the economics and the financial components of thereof. Now, I'm not from Dallas, and I yield that to my good friend and colleague, Donald Payton. Many of them, what I have seen since I've been in Dallas since '79 is that there was a class difference where people of a certain class talked about their history in Dallas, but very few talked about cotton. Very few talked about the plantations that surround it. I've brought that piece of history to Dallas, and that's what I offer to you today, that to understand Deep Ellum, you must understand the context of the African people who came out of the fields, both during slavery and after slavery, and a unique culture, be it music, dress, food, whatever we were able to create to the city of Dallas, and not only to Dallas, but to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarence. That was very insightful. Because my family is an original family from Dallas. We came to Dallas in 1847 with a man named William Brown Miller. He came from, originally he was born in Kentucky, raised in Alabama, left Alabama, came to Tennessee, and from Tennessee over to Independence, Missouri. Independence was very important because it was the jumping off point for people who were going west, going out to Oregon Trail and heading west. So Independence was where they stopped to get all the supplies and everything that they needed to establish homes in the newfound land. But I was very fortunate because I kind of grew up down on Deep Ellum. That was my daddy's place to go. He knew everybody and everything that was down on, Deep Ellum is kind of a new name. It was actually called the Central Tracks, is what people referred to, but the new people coming into town called it Deep Ellum because it was spawned from the arrival of the Houston, Texas, and Central Railroad. We now know that as Central Express. And that was, that came in July 17, 1872. See, Dallas wasn't supposed to get a railroad. They had, the railroad was supposed to get water in Corsicana and stop again in McKinney. But a man named Lane, a state rep named Lane, he said, all right, if we don't stop the railroad in Dallas, let's stop the railroad at Broader Springs and get water at Broader Springs. But it didn't tell people that Broader Springs is right where the city hall is, came right where the city hall is. So the Houston, Texas, and Central came in 1873. It went north and south, 1872, and Texas and Pacific came in 1873, going east and west. See, after Emancipation Proclamation was read, and I'd like to also get some things clear. Texas was not the last state to get the news that slaves were freed. Sometimes I hear people say that, oh, Texas, they got 2.5 years of free labor without telling the slaves that they were free. But that's not true. Kentucky got it the news in August of '65. The Carolinas got it in the fall of '65 because it gives the impression that Lincoln read the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation one day, and the next day we all joined hand in hand and boogaloo down Broadway singing "We Shall Overcome," "We Have Overcome." You know? And I can imagine what anticipation of freedom came, what freedom felt like, because I had that same anticipation when Obama was elected president. Says, oh man, a brother elected president. Things gonna get better now. And I kept looking out the door, trying to see when things better were gonna come. But the music, I'm talking a little bit about the music because you always hear people talk about New Orleans and New York and all of the impact that the music had in America, but hardly ever do they mention the impact that music and musicians from Dallas had. Dallas turned out a great group of musicians for every generation. You had in the teens, you had, as Clarence talked about, was Blind Lemon Jefferson, who was down in Wortham County, down in Limestone County. You had the Dallas String Band. Then you had Honey Ledbetter, who came through here, and that was in the teens. But the guy that really had a major impact on American music was a guy named Alphonso Trent. Alphonso Trent was the first black band, the Alphonso Trent Band, to get a year-long contract at a major hotel. They had a contract to play at the Adolphus Hotel, and they beamed off of this radio station called WFAA Radio. If you ever go down off that Santa Fe building, you still see a great big sign down there that says WFAA. That was, now it's Channel 8, but WFAA had a 50,000 watt beam, and it went all the way to Canada. It went all the way east. That was the Alphonso Trent Band playing. This was before Ellington. He was recording 1924, 1925, the Alphonso Trent Band. And I can just imagine him playing at the Adolphus Hotel, playing the music that the white folks liked. And then after everything was over, go right up Deep Ellum there on the corner of Good and Latimer and Elm Street is a building called the Pythian Temple. It's now called the Pittman Hotel. And I can imagine after he stopped playing for the white folks, what they swung like down after hours down there at that Pythian Hotel, that Pythian building. It had, supposedly had the finest dance floor in the Southwest. And so you had young men who were coming in there playing with guys like a violinist named Stuff Smith, who influenced jazz violin. Now, all of these guys, you had A.G. Gottlieb, who played with Alphonso Trent. He invented a thing called the drum solo. He was the first artist to ever swing a drum solo. So you have to understand the drum. The drum was outlawed in America. You see, you couldn't have drums on plantations. They said that the drum incited runaways, because people would get into that beat and pass messages. One story was they asked Napoleon, after he had gotten beat by the Haitians, says, Napoleon, you're the greatest general in the world. how'd you get beat by those ragtag Haitians? And he said, I should have took them drums. I should have took the drum, because they was passing them beats. Here he come, here he come. Here that little short bastard comes, here he comes, here he comes. And so, and they couldn't shoot the beat, you see. So they defeated Napoleon, so America saw that to prevent runaways, they just take the drum. Now the guys, after so many years, guys down in New Orleans started taking pots and pans and buckets and playing them, and they were called contraptions, you see. And the guy would say, hey, come on, get that contraption and come on with it. And that's where we get the name for what, anybody know? Trap set. The trap set comes from contraptions, you see. So Godley, who played with the Alfonso Trent Band, invented the drum solo. And so you had guys coming out of Dallas like Sammy Price. Sammy Price was first musician to take the boogie woogie to New York. He came off Elm Street. We had a school here. As a matter of fact, this guy's alumni of that school called Booker T. Washington High School. Booker T. Washington High School had a music teacher called Portia Washington Pittman. She was the daughter of Booker T. Washington. Her husband built the Pythian Temple downtown there, William Sidney Pittman. Well, Portia Washington Pittman was the first black woman to ever have a radio show. She had a radio show in 1924-25 on WFAA radio, Portia Washington Pittman. In 1927, the NEA convention met in Dallas. And she brought the choir from Booker T. Washington High School, a 600-voice choir. Every kid in the school was in the choir. And man, they came to that State Fair Music Hall and they rocked that NEA convention. See, Miss Pittman directed the choir. Then she'd turn around and start directing the audience and the place. And they said they could not believe that Negro children could do this. Just imagine now, you got 600 high school kids showing up on time and singing in perfect harmony. 600, very few people, unless you see something like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, very few people will ever see a 600-voice choir. Well, out of Miss Pittman's group, her son came from Booker Washington High School. His name was Booker Pittman. Booker Pittman is known as the father of the bossa nova. He created the bossa nova over in Brazil. The story was that he went with a jazz band through South America and he got sick over there. And this Brazilian woman took him in and raised him, brought him back to good health. So he decided that he would stay in Brazil. You can find some of his music, but he's known as the father of the bossa nova. Some of y'all might remember, Blame It on the Bossa Nova. And that was Booker Pittman from Booker T. Washington High School. Then they started coming down on Deep Ellum, these young men, playing this new music. It was called, kids here, well, actually, it was called ass music, because it made you move your ass. But it didn't look good in print. So they changed it to J-A-Z-Z, and from J-A-S-S to J-A-Z-Z, jazz. And that, that used to be a bad word. The band directors used to tell the kids, don't jazz that music up. play that music straight. Don't jazz it up. Don't jazz it. Because in 1915, the Negro teachers had a meeting to discuss what was happening to the youth. The youth were listening to this low-down, dirty music, getting away from the classes, listening to this low-down, dirty music called ragtime. And it was going to ruin the kids. They were never going to come back to the classics anymore. Playing that ragtime. Well, that came through this area because a lot of times those vaudeville shows would come through Dallas, and they would play Thompson's dance hall right down across from where the Greyhound bus station is, or they would play Ella B. Moore's Theater up on Elm Street. Anybody who was anybody played at Miss Ella B. Moore's Theater. Ella B. Moore, she got very, very wealthy woman. The story was that even her dog had a gold grill. Yeah, Miss Ella B. Moore's dog. So then in the 1920s, we talked earlier about Lemon. His big national hit was, I'm sitting here wondering, will a Matchbox hold my clothes? So, you know, he didn't have a whole lot of clothes if it could fit in a Matchbox. But he played in one of the young men who led Blind Lemon through downtown, up and down through downtown, was a guy named Aaron Thiebaud Walker. He ended up being called T-Bone Walker. So if you ever see this guy who ended up being pretty popular, whose name was Jimi Hendrix, all of the stuff that Jimi Hendrix was doing, T-Bone Walker was doing it in the 30s, playing the guitar behind his back and picking it with his teeth and riding it like it was a horse. And he was the first guy to ever front a band. His name fronted a band called the Les Height Band. The leading guitarist at the area in this area was a young man from Bonham, Texas, whose name was Charlie Christian. Charlie Christian was world famous for kind of the father of the electric, one of the fathers of the electric guitar. But T-Bone took it, and T-Bone influenced guys like B.B. King and Lightning Hopkins and all of the people that we know as Texas blues guitarists. They were all influenced by T-Bone. So that was going into the 20s and into the 30s, you had a group of young men coming out of Booker T. They called them Miss Pittman's Boys. They started playing this big band sound. You remember me telling you earlier that they had been listening to they grew up listening to Alphonso Trent, the big band sound. Well, they were called the Blue Devils. That was a young man from down in Ennis, Texas, whose name was Buster Smith. Buster Smith and his brother Boston Smith, they were in the Blue Devils. You had a young man who played trumpet, second only in popularity and skills to a man named Louis Armstrong. His name was Orrin Hot Lips Page. Orrin Page is buried over behind Lincoln High School over there. They called him Hot Lips. And it was a story one day that some woman came up and she said, asked this guy, says, is Hot Lips here? And he went up on the mic and said, will Warm Jaws come to the... And Hot Lips didn't like being called Warm Jaws. He wanted to be Hot Lips. So he was quite an innovator with the jazz trumpet. And mentioned Buster Smith. Buster Smith had a young prodigy because when they left Dallas, they went up to Oklahoma City. they were called the Oklahoma City Blue Devils. And they started playing with the Benny Moten Band. Well, Benny Moten died early, and the band broke up, and they went up to Kansas City. And in Kansas City, Buster Smith had a young man that he was mentoring named Charlie Parker. They called him Bird. And Charlie Parker, the way he said he got the name Bird, is that they were on a tour bus one day going down the highway, and a chicken crossed in front of the bus. And Charlie Parker said, "Stop the bus, stop the bus, hold up, there's a chicken. I know what to do with a chicken." And they pulled the bus over, and they cooked, cleaned, and ate the chicken right there on the side of the bus. And from that day on, they called him what? Bird. Yeah, because he was stopped that chicken. So so Buster influenced Charlie Parker, and in the process, they brought a young man in from Red Bank, New Jersey, named William Basie. And he got the name Count from one of the management. They said, "Well, we got a King Ori, and we got a Duke Ellington. So what can we Count Basie?" And that's how the band ended up being called the Count Basie Band. It was actually Buster Smith's band. Buster wrote all of the charts. He wrote one called 1 O'Clock Jump, which is a jazz classic. All big bands played 1 O'Clock Jump. And Buster told me that Count Basie gave him a fifth of gin and $25. And he didn't know what to name it, and he looked at the clock, and it was 1 o'clock. And he said, 1 O'Clock Jump, and gave it. And I says, "Buster, they played it all over the world." He says, "Yeah, man, I know, but hell, I was just writing songs, I wasn't worried about how much money I was making. I just writing, because it's like everything else. You never know what a song is gonna say or what a song is gonna do." So, and they had the Johnson brothers, Keg Johnson and Bud Johnson. They were came out of the Basie Band. They were Dallas guys. They went to Booker T. Washington High School, and Bud Johnson's son was a rapper called Prodigy. I don't know if y'all know rap music, but Prodigy, granddaddy, is from Dallas. And so in the 1950s, we had a young man who lived here in Dallas, whose name was Ray Charles Robinson. And so he organized his first band. He came through here playing with a man named Lowell Fulson. Lowell Fulson wrote Tramp and quite a few, Black Night is Falling, Oh, I Hate to Be Alone. Well, Ray Charles was his piano player, and he came to Dallas and took up living here, changed his name from Ray Charles Robinson to Ray Charles. And his band was young men from Lincoln High School. A young man named James Clay and another guy called himself Fathead Newman. David Fathead Newman says he got the name Fathead. He was playing in Lincoln's high school band, and he had the music upside down and was playing, and the band director came over and slapped him and said, "Play that music right, Fathead." And from that day on, he was known as Fathead Newman, David Fathead. If you ever see the movie Ray, you see David Newman is supposedly introduced Ray Charles to shooting dope, but Fatty had told us that he didn't like the movie, because it showed him as being the man who introduced Ray Charles to heroin. He said Ray Charles was a qualified, bona fide dope fiend when I met him. Said, but that movie made it look like I made Ray shoot dope. Ray was shooting dope, and Ray Charles said that he liked Dallas because Dallas had beautiful women, good horn players, and real good dope. Because he was a registered drug addict, Ray Charles was, you see. So that was musicians from the 50s. And if you ever heard of a musician called himself Miles Davis, Miles Davis's piano player was a young man from down here, born on Deep Ellum. You remember, we were working and we found his address down on Deep Ellum. And he was born on Deep Ellum. His name was Red Garland. Red Garland introduced the bebop piano style, called it block playing. He was with this young man called Miles Davis. See, bebop killed big band jazz because you couldn't dance to bebop. And dance music was the music of the day, just like Motown music killed doo-wop. All those Motown, them doo-wop groups signed with Motown, and Motown added something to doo-wop. And the group that's really credited with killing doo-wop is a group called the Drifters. They were the first group to use violins in rock and roll music. And so that changed the music style, was the Drifters. And it was so fun growing up here in Dallas. And when those first rock and roll shows came in, because, the ministers, oh man, they preached against rock and roll. They called it devil's music. People coming out, kids dancing and wearing their hair different, and they used to have people used to bring records out and they'd burn them and break records and things, because there's awful music called rock and roll. So I was a kid of the rock and roll, because they used to have a place right off of Cadiz and Industrial down there called the Sportatorium, where all of the, I think you did a piece on the Sportatorium, didn't you? Yes, and that's where all of the wrestlers used to be. All of the guys used to come in. Got a chance to meet a guy named Rocky Johnson. His son is called The Rock. If y'all familiar with this movie star, The Rock, his daddy was a wrestler, Rocky Johnson. My aunt used to love Rocky Johnson. We used to laugh. She took a picture of her husband out of the frame and put Rocky Johnson in the frame. Yeah. Yeah, so that rock and roll came in. We didn't know what rock and roll was going to do, but they brought this guy in, and he went, wop, baba, loop, baba, la, bam, boom. And we said, oh, we don't know what he's saying, but man, he certainly has a way of saying it. And I got a chance to meet this group called the Monotones, got backstage with them, and they had a song out called I Wonder, Wonder Who wrote the book of love. Yeah, and I got a chance to hang with the Monotones, and I said, man, my life is dedicated to rock and roll. I'm gonna rock and roll to the end. And my dad used to take me down on Elm Street into them joints. And man, there was talented musicians down on Deep Ellum at that time. Had a guy named Frankie Lee Sims. Frankie Lee Sims come out of West Dallas over there. He had a song called the Lucy May Blues. You can pull it up. Ain't no telling what Lucy May will do. Lucy May left here one Sunday afternoon, didn't see her no more till the 19th of June. And I better not let my good girl catch you here. The Lucy May Blues. You had Little Son Jackson. All of those guys, they were coming out of Deep Ellum. They had an old theater down there called the Harlem Theater. Man, it had so much pee in it you could smell it coming down Elm Street. It was horrible, but it was our theater. So, my dad, I said, Daddy, smell in here. I said, oh, boy, just breathe it in. You get used to it. Just act like you don't smell it, boy. Look at the movie. Don't worry about what it smells like. Look at the movie. Because, and it was always so funny to see a guy. And he would come, some guy, he'd be coming down Elm Street, and he'd have a pair of new shoes in a sack, And the guy would see him, and he says, little Jewish guy, he's standing at the door at his place like this. Because you used to could borrow money on your clothes. You used to could take your suit down to the pawn shop and borrow money, or take your shoes, borrow money on your shoes. And guy standing in the door like this, and guy come by and he says, hey, see, you got yourself some new shoes there, huh? He says, yeah, got some new shoes. And the guy's walking with his shoes. And he says, hey, I see you got shoes from bar shops. His bags are thin. I got strong bags. Come here and let me take your shoes and put them in a new, nice, strong bag so your shoes don't fall out on the street and get all scarred up. Guy comes in and get himself a new bag, and he says, you're not going to put those dirty socks in them brand new shoes, are you? He says, well, no, I didn't think about that. He says, all right, come here, let me give you, got new socks, go in the new shoes. He says, you go to church? He says, yeah, gonna wear your new shoes to church? You're not gonna wear an old suit with brand new shoes, are you? He says, well, I didn't think about that. He says, oh, come here, I got a suit for you. Come right in. Guy comes in, and about this time, the team comes out, and they start circling you. And one guy, he says, you got to have a new shirt. New shirt. You're not going to wear an old shirt with a new suit. You got to have a new shirt. You wear a necktie to church? Yeah. Well, oh, I give you necktie. Anybody know what lanyap is? Lanyap. Yes. Yeah, a little something extra. You buy a suit and they give you a necktie. The necktie is lanyap. That's a Louisiana term they do use down there, a little lanyap. And the guy comes in, and they got him in a spin like this. And one guy is tucking, the guy wears a size 40 suit, but the only suit they got is a size 50. So they take the suit and they put the suit, and one guy's pulling the shirt, and then one guy pulls it from the back and shows you how good the suit fits in the front. Then you turn to the back, and he pulls it from the front and shows you how good the suit fits you in the back. And he used to say, it fits you like the paper on the wall. Fits you like the paper on the wall. Fits you tight. Fits you close. And so you come out, and the guy tucked the shirt, the cuffs in, tucked the legs and the cuffs, and they're spinning you like this. And when you finish spinning, they done sent you by the cash register. And one guy's got you, and he's heading you up Elm Street like this, because he knows that when you get home and put this size 50 suit on a size 40 body, you coming back. And you come back, and he says, oh, that guy that sold you that suit, he's not here anymore. We found out he wasn't nice to the customers. He's not here. But while you're here, how would you like to have a new shirt? And, I mean, it was just magic to watch how them Jewish merchants would work. And we used to buy, my daddy loved secondhand shoes. He said secondhand shoes had been broken in. People had already worn them, so that was how we used to spend our Saturdays. A day like today, we'd be up on Elm Street, and he knew every guy on Central Track. He'd go up on the Central Track because they used to buy their meat up here. It's a meat market up there called Rudolph's, and it's been there for 100 plus years, Rudolph's Meat Market. So everybody used to come, because the major grocery store used to be right down here at the Piggly Wiggly, across from City Hall down there. It's apartments now, but that was the major grocery store, was the Piggly Wiggly. So, I grew up kind of knowing a lot of the people who lived and worked on Elm Street, because the town, Dallas, was divided. When you go into a small town, a country town, what's the thing that divides the town? Yes, the railroad tracks. You can't date somebody from the other side of the tracks. Ooh, she's dating a boy from the other side of the tracks. You see? Yes. So we had, the Central Track, the Central Expressway, that was what divided white Dallas and black Dallas, was the Central Track. Yeah. I'd love to take questions about. Yeah. And your sack is in the way here. Just picking this cotton. Yeah, it's on the wrong side of the sack over there. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the picture behind you, so I guess it's the Cotton Exchange building.
Yes.
Where, is there any of that left, and what's the location?
No, I spoke recently at the Dallas Regional Chamber just the other day. I spoke for their Juneteenth. And while I was up in the building there at Ackert, and I told them to Google the address of the Cotton Exchange. And what they realized is that when they looked out the window, the corner of San Jacinto, right next to the church, First Baptist Church, where the parking lot is where the Cotton Exchange building once stood. It was imploded, you can Google it, in 1994. One of the things that, again, this is a panel schedule, as you just heard my brother Don, describes a lot of the life ventures of the Elm community. But what I like to offer is that both during slavery and during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, right up into the 1970s, 60s, even 70s, people would come there because they lived in other places and worked in fields and cotton and other things. This is where they came to spend their money with the merchants and so forth. Now, today, for a period of time, it went down. When I came in 79, it was just ruined, just people. Then the artists took it up, the buildings. They started moving in. And then later, it began to, as we see now, urban used to be people of color. And then we began to see gentrification. Now they began coming back in, moving people out. This is the new challenge. Dallas has a new racial equity policy. So if we were talking today about Juneteenth, we were talking about Deep Ellum, where I live in Elm Thicket, and all those different places. We are talking about the displacement of citizens who gave their lives and bodies and work to make Dallas what it is today, but yet have never benefited from the economic opportunities that the city has to offer.
Thank you.
You see, Dallas was never, it was kind of an accidental city. Dallas didn't have water, didn't have steel mills, didn't have timber, all of the things that a lot of the major cities were built around. Dallas had none of that. Dallas was built on insurance companies, banks, and churches. They had, up to this day, the largest Methodist church, the Highland Park United Methodist Church, First Baptist Church, the largest gay church, Hope Cathedral. Dallas had all of these churches. So black folks couldn't get into banking, couldn't get into for the industries, the only industry that black folks could get in was churches. We could have preachers. And black women were the ones who got black men in position. Because the black women worked, cooked, cleaned for families. And the guy would say, well, we need a new yard man. Says, you know, just for instance, Emma, do you know anybody that can cut a yard? Says, yeah, well, my brother-in-law cuts yard. All right now, we're gonna bring him in over here to work, but you're responsible for his behavior now. Whatever happens, you are responsible. See, because if you ever go over on where this lady said her parents lived on South Boulevard and Park Road, you got those apartments in the back. That's called servants' quarters. That's where the servants live. And the women lived there, and they would have what they call Thursday was maid's night off. So your boyfriend or your husband can come visit you in the servants' quarters on Thursdays. And they say they didn't pay them on Fridays because if they paid them on Fridays, wouldn't see them no more than Monday. But they pay them on Thursdays and they'd be broke Friday and they'd be back Saturday and cooking for Sunday.
Yeah. The mayor offer, again, that's Professor, we engage in debate and discussions. But Peyton, I like the office. You said Dallas, and we hear this often is built on banks, church, and insurance. But the research shows to us that Dallas is built on cotton. Let me make my point. Let me make my point. Let me make my point, please. Let me make my point. Thank you. Is that when you look at the Cochrans and the Dallas counties and the even with the Munger gin, which came in 1800, I think that what Dallas does is not really talk about, and I have documentation. You may see these huge books, I call them coffee table books. And because I buy them in Highland Park and North Dallas and other places, and I've dealt with some of the, even with Stark Taylor, whose father was a cotton baron in the city of Texas. And as I said, this was 1/6 of the world's cotton that was produced here. What I find here is that African Americans do not talk about the cotton that surrounded the area, the plantations that were here down on 2nd Avenue, the cotton that was in the Cotton Bowl, the cotton that was in the Love Field area. And even as we look today, if you would Google Channel 4, John Warren, there's now a book that now is out that he just found it in the archives where they now have written documentation of the men and women who were owned here in Dallas County. It's just been found in the archives. And I hope to talk to him next week about it. And these are the Joes and the Bobs and the Marys and the Sues who are the enslaved Africans. And that even it gave the name of Old Frank, who is buried in Park Cities, one of his name. So what I'm offering as a part of our discussion and our debate as we talk about Deep Ellum, Don, is that I think that the city of Dallas must look, because these tabletop books I'm talking about, and not just the tabletop books, that when you see them, what I've come to find is that when the city fathers, be it the Carews and the plantation, what they see as the foundation, a major foundation, not having trained and not having all those things you described, is that the plantation system, which was short-lived in Texas, only about 50 years because of the antebellum South, but that at the basis of that was the cotton, and that Dallas was the leading cotton industry going into the 1920s and 1930s. So I offer that as our discussion today as we engage in this, looking at Deep Ellum. Because on Deep Ellum, you not only had the cotton gin, but you also had the Ford plant of Henry Ford. And we know that because cars during that time, tires were made from cotton fiber. So you needed the cotton fiber to help support the industry. And I'm just offering today that as we look at Juneteenth now as a national federal holiday can open us up to having a deeper discussion about the enslaved African people and the product that they worked that made the Industrial Revolution, because it was not until the cotton industry in Texas played a major role in that.
We got like 3 minutes.
I just want to offer
3 minutes?
alternative opinions.
Is it, both of you, the gentrification and the pushing out that you guys have discussed? And if so, what role do bringing these stories to light have to do with, I don't know, saving part of the city from gentrification, if that's even
Well,
possible?
my community right now, Elm Thinking North Park, we're literally going through that through our zoning issue right now. And as a result of that, because at our meeting, one lady mentioned the Peters Colony. And I began to do more research because I knew about the Peters Colony. And the Peters Colony, in essence, is free white land. That's what the Peters Colony imply. That this is our land, we will get free land. So we have this undercurrent in Dallas, because once we move out of my community, Elm Thinking, which is right next to Park City, you will have very few African Americans living north of 30, Trinity, whatever. So we do see a difference. Like we saw Booker T. Washington destroyed North Dallas. We saw, all these where African Americans, Barnard's 2,000 acres up in North Dallas. So we are seeing this moving out and taking out of African people. I call it the great cotton cover-up in Dallas. Dallas has experienced a great cover-up, and it is about cotton. And I submit to you that as an African American, as I've been here for now since '79, even my own community, that it is not comfortable for us to talk about cotton. Because one of the things he did talk about, because there were books in Dallas, if you work for a certain person, you were Mr. Jones' maid, you were Mr. Jones' this, and the women did have more influence than the men, as he was correct. You couldn't buy a car, you go to the women. But see, one of the things that happened in Dallas is that in 1860, that there was the burning down of Dallas. You can Google it. Dallas business district was burned down. Some suggest that these men came out of plantations of carpet, abolitionists, etc. But they were lynched, 3 of them on the thing. And then other men were beaten. The backstory is that, one, during this time, you have to control the men, ultimately, break their spirits. And by doing this, we can control the cotton. Going right up into the 1920s, where African American men, women, yes, pick cotton, but there are 6 components of cotton, ladies and gentlemen. When you plant, you chop, you pick, you pull, you bale. There was one last thing that Africans did not do in America. You sell. 5, sell. Dallas blew up as the Interland Cotton Exchange. Memphis still has his. Houston still has his cotton exchange building. And what happens, you can see in some, my family's from Memphis, what you see that you don't see in Dallas is that association with cotton. You got Fort Worth and cattle. You still have that sense of, well, we're a city, but we got a little cattle going on. You see it down in New Orleans, you can go down there, I'm from Louisiana, you go to Memphis. Yes, we still talk about our cotton in Memphis, because we got our cotton exchange. You go down to New Orleans, we still talk about our cotton. You don't talk about your cotton in Dallas. Because if you talk about your cotton in Dallas, you talk about us. And when you talk about us, then you got to talk about the equities that have been imposed upon us that nobody wants to change today. I drive throughout South Dallas all the time. I live out, and what I see today is like Soweto and Johannesburg. If you want to go down Martin Luther King, drive through it. You will see people living in tents, naked people lying on the streets. I dealt with a situation here recently where a woman was naked on the streets of Martin Luther King. I called officials. I called different people. She was naked, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, you talk about history repeating itself. 1865, all of the things that we were supposed to get in 1865, we're fighting for at this very minute. Voting rights, women's rights, you see, housing, health, the same things that we were talking about coming out of slavery, we're dealing with them right now. Insane laws to where you cannot give a person a bottle of water if they're standing in a line registering to vote or coming to vote. It is this time, right now, we're dealing with some of the very same issues. Women's choices. Women have old white men, old gray-haired white men, making choices for them. And that's saying that you're a woman. You don't have sense enough to make your own choice about who you are or what you want to be. They're talking about one of the main things they're talking about now, turning back the clock on interracial marriage. They're debating that right now about blacks and whites and other people marrying. So the things that we were fighting about coming out of the Civil War, to this very moment, we are still fighting somewhere in this country. Some people are marching and demonstrating for the very things that we were supposed to get coming out of slavery. Land ownership, just talking about gentrification, taking the land, taking poor people's land. Coming out into the 1870s, blacks owned more land in America than they own today, is it? So all of that's being taken back. And if we're not careful, they're gonna turn back the clock on the things that we fought so hard to get. The women's movement came into and was in the 1900s. Mrs. Barry Miller, Minnie Miller, was one of the very first women to vote. Her husband was Barry Miller. He's responsible, his grandfather is the man that owned my family, William Brown Miller. His father, Barry Miller, is responsible for women getting the vote in the state of Texas. They came to him and said, we want to vote. And he said, well, I tell you what, give me 5,000 signatures, 5,000 women's signatures, and I'll introduce this to the Texas legislature. They got 10,000 votes, 10,000 signatures. So Barry Miller is responsible for us getting the right to vote. He's also responsible for the bluebonnet being the state flower. Governor Culberson's wife says, oh, I just love the bluebonnet. I think it's so beautiful. And he went and introduced legislation to make the bluebonnet. So the Millers, they were pretty liberal for the time, because you know you always get that picture of the old mean slave owner chopping off people's feet and burying them in the dirt and all of this. Minnie Miller was a first graduate of this school called Ursuline Academy. Mr. Miller, William Brown Miller, established the very first school for girls in Dallas. See, girls couldn't get an education in Dallas. People say, why you want to educate girls? All they're going to do is have babies and be wives and do what they're told to do. They don't need education for that.
As we close.
I'm not closing. We do have some people who are very liberal, you know, in the city, you know. And so the Millers were one of those families because they allowed my family to buy land. My great-great-grandfather was the largest landowner in the southern sector of Dallas County, John Miller. You see, so.
This again, the years I've been in, the debates that I've had with Don over the years and the discussions, is that when we talk about Dallas and we leave out cotton and the role that it played in Dallas, we are leaving out a significant component of the history that the African American community does not talk about. And I submit to you today, is not only for the African American community. I'm doing a workshop now called Shackles and Keys. I didn't bring my shackles with me. But those who also in shackles, the people of color, those who had the key, primarily white men, must be considered in this conversation. But in Texas, we do not talk about the white male because of the power that he has swayed in this city. And I submit to you today that the things that he just alluded to after the Civil War, which also, however, went through Reconstruction, which we did not allude to, the 10-year period where we had lieutenant governors and other people, where we had certain liberal things taking place. But in 1877, when Rutherford B. Hayes, during the time when they selected the vote, what they call the electoral colleges and all of that, they went back 100 years. See, we need to know the history and the sequence of those things. So we did have a 10-year radical. We are coming out of another radical reconstruction where we've had some things happen, There are books, even with evangelical white communities, even Pastor Chris Wells, the church here, now First Baptist, the evangelical churches who are working with the conservative politicians, and all of these things, and the rise of the Old South. When I was at SMU and I came there, they had the Old South would rise again. The Old South ball was at SMU, the second largest Confederate flag in the nation was at SMU. We had to remove that. They rolled across the campuses on horseback to take their invitations over to the women in the sorority houses. Then I began to deal with the whole Citizens Council thing here, which came out of Mississippi, which was the white Citizens Council. Now, these are the things as we close today, I say close because they told me 3 o'clock, is that we as citizens must consider as we move into this new period of a new holiday. You mentioned killing. One of these people who owned us did not kill us during slavery. They punished us. Lynchings and the other things that happened, as you see, were really active. Unless you were a rebel, leading a revolution in the plantation, they would kill you. You don't kill the best bull.
Costs a lot of money.
You cost a lot of money.
Slaves did.
You whip your slave. You punish your slave, your African. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing this today because this is what I do now. I'm showing you the history, the reality done. And I'm from the plantation. I'm from cotton. In Dallas, we must, African Americans, blacks, and white men must begin to speak about it. The whip they've used in this city has left lasting psychological and emotional damage. And I submit that to you today, that Deep Ellum is a place where our people came off the fields of labor to buy, only to go back up into the 1960s almost, to pick more and more cotton that continued to build this city up until Stark Taylor, in 1983, who became mayor on the first ballot, whose father was a cotton barrier. I submit that to you today, ladies and gentlemen, as my case. Thank you.